Okay, are we ready to start? We have a lot to do today. We're doing all of Joshua and all of Judges. And so I want us to get started right away. The way I want us to pray today is, you remember from Deuteronomy, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." What is that called? The Shema. Perfect. The Shema. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And for our prayer, I want us to hear a practicing Jew say the first line of the Shema. Okay? So that will be our prayer today.
People to be able to practice saying, "Hi everyone." So I have a lot of requests for people to be able to practice saying the Shema. The Shema is probably the most important and special prayer to the Jewish people. It's said twice a day, once in the morning when we wake up, and at nighttime before we go to sleep. It's one of the first prayers a young child learns to say. It's found in the Torah and is put into every siddur, every prayer book. So we're going to work our way through it today. We're actually going to say the first paragraph of the Shema, and it begins over here with the first line, which means, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now notice there is actually a slightly larger ayin, this third letter over here, and a slightly larger daled, this last letter over here. And when those two letters are put together, it spells the word aid, which means a witness, because we are God's witness in this world. So let's say the Shema together, and you can follow along in your own books or on the screen. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And that first line is said with our hands covering our eyes, and that increased the amount of concentration that we have when saying this very important prayer. The second verse is said quietly, in a whisper, just loud enough for ourselves to hear, but preferably not anybody else. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. And then we have the first paragraph itself.
And then he goes through the whole thing, but I wanted you to hear that, and I think it's so cool. And you notice when he was saying each word, he was singing each word, right? Do you know why? Why do they sing their prayer? Why do we sing our ABCs?
It's easier to learn.
Easier to learn and easier to remember. And that's honestly why. Because it creates a rhythm, and then you remember what comes next and what comes next. Because these people, they don't just have the one verse memorized, they have all of it memorized. So that's what it's for. Do we have any prayer requests today? Okay, so I'll pray, and then to conclude our prayer, I'm going to read in English those two verses. The verse that he said, "You cover your eyes," is the "Hear, O Israel." And then he said the next one, you whisper it, right? So that no one else can hear it. Do you remember what that second verse says? Love the Lord your God with all your heart. That's really cool that they cover their eyes for the first one, and for the second one they whisper it so that their hearts can hear it, that no one around them can hear it. That's really cool. That gives me the chills. All right, let's pray. Father, we have so many needs, and we lift up these that have been mentioned today, and so many others that are unspoken, Lord, that we whisper even to our hearts. Please teach us today. The books that we are going to study are hard. Lord, there's a lot of things that we don't understand, and there's a lot of things that we question, and so I pray that you would give us a spirit of understanding today, and that you would help us all to not leave here knowing everything about it, but leave here knowing one more thing about you. That's all we ask. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk around the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses on your gates. Amen. That is the Shema. Okay, so let's review as always, and you're welcome to get up and get treats or whatever during the class. I have prizes for people who answer correctly today. Genesis starts with a creation. What is the word in Hebrew that it is a special word for the creation that only God does? Remember, humans may form, they may make, they can fashion, but they cannot create. Anybody? Good job! Hurrah! Very good. Very, very, very good. Okay, second question. This is easy, so I need you to raise your hand because I think more than one of you is going to know. Abraham is given a 4-part promise. What are the 4 things? No hands? Judy, try it.
Land, descendants, blessings, and great name.
Good job.
Very good job. I'm so impressed. Okay, what is the name of Moses' wife? What were you about to say?
No, I was saying Abraham's wife,
Oh.
so never mind, sorry.
No. Okay, that's a hard one. His wife's name was Zipporah. Zipporah. What were the names? Remember, Moses sent out 12 spies into the land by God's command. 10 of the spies brought back a negative report. What are the names of the 2 spies? Raise your hand. Name of the 2 spies that brought back a good report on the land.
Caleb and Joshua.
Okay, very good, very good. So that's going to be our review for today because we have a lot to cover. But I did give you a whole sheet, and it has all of the books of the Pentateuch, which we have now completed, and it has what I believe you should know about them by memory. So as you're connecting the pieces of the Old Testament, and you start from Genesis, this is what you should be able to say all the way to the end and connect them. This is how we connect them all, okay? So I'm going to continue to test you because this is important. The second little handout tab, let me get back to our oh, and if you have not heard, all of the videos are on YouTube now. So if you don't have that link, ask me for it and I can email it to you. Where's the button? Where's the button? Oh, before I start, next week, our class is doing a service project together. After our lesson together, if you have some time to stay, we are going to put boxes together for Operation Christmas Child. Laura is actually in charge of this for our whole church. So Laura, tell us in a snippet what we're going to accomplish and what we should bring, if we should bring anything.
We are going to put together I don't know if you remember last year, the red and green boxes that actually say Operation Christmas Child made out of cardboard. They come flat, and so they just need to be assembled. So I just need us to assemble there's 100 boxes I'm supposed to be picking up this week, and we just need to assemble them and put labels on them.
So if you have some time after our class, and I'll make sure to end a bit early, and we'll all do that together, and with this many hands we can accomplish much. So thank you, Laura, for that. The next thing I want you to see is we are now moving into, we've done all of the Pentateuch. We've done Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And now we are going to begin our historical books. Remember the divisions, the 4 parts that our Old Testament has? Now we're going to start historical books. Joshua, Judges, we're going to do today. Next week we are doing Ruth and 1st and 2nd Samuel. Okay? And then don't worry about the time. We're not going to be meeting for 10 years. It's just these, I'm gonna do most of the minor prophets all in a day. So we're not going to be here forever. But these are the bulkier books, so we have to take time to understand them. Here is an outline of the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua is a very hard book to teach and a very hard book for us to read. It's very violent, okay? Chapters 1 through 12, basically, they are going into this land that is already occupied, and they are fighting for it, and they are killing people that are already in there. I'm going to open my Bible to Joshua, so we're all there. So chapters 1 through 12 is they're fighting. Then the second little section is they're dividing the land. So they're in the land and they're saying, okay, this part's going to be for the tribe of Benjamin, this part's going to be for the tribe of Manasseh, etc. And then the last two chapters is remember the covenant. They're reestablishing the covenant. That's the outline. So Moses dies, and Joshua takes over as the Moses figure, okay? They are in Moab. Do you remember at the end where they were still in Moab, and the men had sexual relations with the Moabite women, and then they started to worship the gods of the Moabite women? Do you remember all that? So they're still in the plain of Moab at this point at the beginning of Joshua. And if you look at chapter 1, verse 6, it says, "Be strong and courageous." This is the Lord speaking to Joshua. Then verse 7 again, "Be very strong and courageous, because you now are going to be the one that are going to lead these people into the land." Remember, Moses was not allowed. He saw the land, but he died before taking possession of it. So now God is saying, Joshua, you need to be strong, because you're the one that's going to lead these people. You're the leader now. And then I like the end here. It says in verse 16 of chapter 1. So Joshua pretty much tells the people, God told me this. We got to be strong. We got to take the land. In 1:16, they all answered Joshua, "Whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go." So they're completely embracing Joshua as their new leader. And throughout the book of Joshua, Joshua will become the new Moses in many, many ways. And we'll start to compare him in that. Okay, so the next is a better little map. So here they are at the plain of Moab, and right now they are camped in Shittim, which is right here, this dot. And here's the Dead Sea, and there's the Jericho River, is the little skinny one. The Jericho River is not real wide, okay? Do you see the Jericho River? Do you see Jericho, the other black dot way up there? So they're here, and they're looking into Jericho. And that's what they want to take next, okay? The first one they want to take. So that distance is about 13 miles. And remember, there's no cars. They're on foot. And how many men are on foot did we estimate last time? A bunch, about 600,000. Again, it probably is a little bit less at this point, because remember, a lot of them keep dying because they keep sinning. So maybe less. So what happens is they're in Shittim, they're looking out into Jericho, and Joshua sends 2 spies into Jericho to gather intel. And that's where we get the story of Rahab. You remember the story of Rahab. We know Rahab as what? What was her? Yeah, she was a prostitute. The way the houses were back then is her house was actually in the city wall. So there's a big city wall on the outside, and her house shares a wall with the outside. Okay? That's what my seminary professor explained to me. I never understood that. But that's where it is. So it makes sense that that's where they would go. So the 2 spies go, and they gather information. They may have used Rahab's services. And then the city officials knock and say, Rahab, we've heard about some spies from the Israelites. Do you have them? And what does Rahab say?
Yes.
No, she says no. She says no. She says, I have not heard of any spies. Who, me? What? And what Rahab does is she hides the spies on her roof. Okay? And although Rahab is a prostitute, and although she is of Jericho, she, in her little speech, let me read it to you. Chapter 2, verse 11. She is talking now to the spies. She said, we heard about you guys leaving Egypt. We heard about all the things that God has said. And she says in 11, when we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven and above and the earth below. Verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to me and that my family will live because, I've shown kindness to you. So here Rahab is not an Israelite. She's a prostitute, and she has heard remember that these news probably traveled that they left Egypt and that God was traveling with them in a cloud and that God was giving them victory and that the plagues of Egypt, think of all that has happened. These people have started to hear about it. And here Rahab is saying, your God is the God of heaven. And she is believing in God, and she hides the spies. So what happens, the spies, she literally lowers them from her window so that they can then run away. And the spies say, tie a scarlet cord around your, I don't remember what it was, your house or your window, so that we'll know to spare you and your family. And eventually, when the Israelites come and take Jericho, the news has traveled to the Israelites to spare Rahab, and they'll know who she is and her family by the scarlet cord tied at her house. That's the story of Rahab. Questions? So one of the articles I gave you was called, here it is. It's stapled together. Was Rahab really a harlot? And you can read this. This is a pretty scholarly journal article. When you're my family, when you're two Bible geeks living together, you don't get Cosmo in the mail, you get Biblical Archaeology Review. So that's what this is from, and I just thought this was a really cool article, and it gives you some pictures of their excavations at Jericho, and some of the houses, like I explained to you, the house where she lived was an outside, and so there's some pictures there. But this author was arguing that the word harlot in the story is very similar to the word innkeeper. So was she really a harlot, or was she an innkeeper?
Or maybe both.
Or maybe both.
What if she wasn't a harlot?
What if she wasn't a harlot?
Yeah, just think of all these years.
I know. But this is not to shake your faith. I actually believe she was a harlot. I have looked at the word. But this is to show you how not dead the Bible is. There are people over in this land today searching the ground, trying to find everything they can, seeing if they can find any piece of evidence or any piece of anything, not just to prove the Bible, but to give us more information. There are people who do nothing but research and write about this stuff just so they can understand it more. So I just wanted to show you that the Bible is very much alive today, and that people are still interested in this, writing about this, discovering more. So I didn't mean to shake your faith. Rahab still probably was a prostitute. So,
I mean, why else would she have the guys coming in there?
right.
Besides, it doesn't mention a husband.
No, she,
It does-
that's right.
It doesn't mention.
That
her
doesn't
husband,
mean she
and-
wasn't a widow.
Right, but in biblical days, okay, in biblical days, I know when to take care of you, what else was there to do?
What else was there to do? Okay, so now I had one seminary professor that she even was very sure that the spies only came to her house to use a prostitute. A different professor said, I don't think so. So there's whatever. You don't have to.
Even among scholars, there's this.
I mean, if they would've went in at
Everything
the
that I
wrong
teach you
place.
is my interpretation and my belief. So you
Yeah.
have to remember. You have to. Why is it there? What is it for? How am I going to believe this? This is why God has given each person faith, not just the pastor faith. He doesn't just dictate what we believe. He teaches us, but we, as you know, especially the Baptist faith, gives us this ability to ourselves decide what we will believe. Joshua continues, and then, so what happens is, and this is a cool picture I wanted you to see. What is this under this tarp? The Ark of the Covenant always traveled in front of the people. The priest would take the Ark, and it would go ahead of them. I just had a freak out moment. Let me make sure that this camera is recording.
Oh, you little thing.
Yes, it is. Okay. I'm sorry. I did not want to have to go home and do that again. Okay, so it traveled in front of the people. And what happened is, remember that map that they were in Shittim and they had to, the Jordan River was in between, so they had to cross the Jordan River. So when the priests are going ahead with the ark and their feet touch the water of the Jordan River, what happens? The waters part. So, Joshua as the new Moses, he is parting a sea just like Moses. So remember, remember this is oral history. These people are hearing this. They're not reading it. They're hearing it. So they would have been like, oh, hey, Moses did that too. Remember, they are hearing it. So going with that, Joshua 4, verse 14 says, 4:14, that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him all the days of his life, just as they revered Moses. He's the new Moses. Okay, I want you to see that. Next slide. Talking more about Joshua. He is the successor. At the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses is actually dying, there's a verse that says that the spirit of Moses was passed on to Joshua. So he is not just the military leader. He is also, from Moses, the spiritual leader of these people. He is the one that is still getting face to, I don't think it says that Joshua was face to face with God, but he is getting the voice of God's direction, okay? Something I want you to also notice, in the beginning of the book of Joshua, all of Moses' life he is said to be Moses, the servant of the Lord. In the beginning of the book of Joshua, he is Joshua, in 1:1, he is Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide. And then the whole book of Joshua happens. And when we're done, I'm going to read to you what it says about Joshua. At the end of the book, he is described not as Moses' aide, but as something else. So, how did the whole Jericho thing happen? The Israelites did not have to do much. They did not have to besiege the city walls. Basically, 7 priests marched in front, going in front ahead of everybody with the Ark of the Covenant, making a circuit of the city on 7 days, 7 successive days. They are blowing the ram's horn as they march. On the 7th day, as they do it, they also do it 7 times on the 7th day instead of just once. Culminating at the end of the 7th time on the 7th day, all of the Israelites are to shout loudly. And as they shout, what happens? Walls come tumbling down. Yeah. The walls collapse. I mean, they didn't have to fight. They just walked around and shouted, and the walls collapsed. This is a picture I took in Jericho, and this is the remains of a tower base in Jericho. And there's a lot of wall remaining at the very, very bottom. Yeah.
I had heard one time that the neat thing about Israel is that they don't fix things like that. They leave things, you
Yeah.
know, like as a remembrance. You know,
Well-
you would think you would fix it.
And Jericho, it's interesting you said that. They do rebuild some things. But do you remember at the end of the whole battle with Jericho what was said? I think by God. I'll have to find the verse, but basically Joshua curses Jericho and says, whoever ever rebuilds this city, cursed be he. I have to find the verse.
It's verse 26.
There you go, Laura, thank you. 26, chapter 6, verse 26. At that time, Joshua pronounced this solemn oath. Cursed before the Lord is the man who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. It's never been rebuilt. Maybe they tried to, and it's, the Lord takes that seriously, so he didn't allow it to happen. But it is not, it is, I have more pictures, but I chose this one. But it is dirt and rubble, there's nothing there, but remains, very, very old remains, barely there remains.
My Bible mentions that apparently the curse was fulfilled in 1 Kings when a man named, is it Hiel, rebuilt Jericho, consequently lost his oldest and youngest son.
Okay, so see, there in 1 Kings, someone tried to rebuild it, and then they lost their
Yeah, but it says, at the cost of his firstborn son, will he lay his foundation at the cost of his youngest.
So, true stuff. I also, I'm not going to be able to have time to talk about this, but the battle at Gibeon, it's in chapter 10, you can read it, but it's when the Israelites defeat the Amorites. That's who they're fighting in chapter 10. It is also a supernatural victory like this. Do you remember what happens then? Gibeon is won when Joshua commands the sun and the moon to stand still until the Israelites have enough time to pursue and basically annihilate all of the people.
How long did the sun stand still?
I think 10 minutes. It stopped for, I don't know if it says, but it's in verse, chapter 10, verse 13. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. I guess it doesn't say how long, but until they were dead.
Later in the verse it says it didn't taste and go down for about a whole day.
Yeah, there you go. So that's another supernatural victory. I mean, commanding the sun and the moon to stand still so that they could have more time to kill their enemy. And then I also want to point out, if you're in chapter 10 there, go to verse 21. It says, the whole army, this is the Israelites, returned safely to Joshua in the camp of whatever, and no one uttered a word against the Israelites. That's not the verse I wanted to read. It basically says that the verse I wanted to read says that the Israelites did not suffer so much as a scratch on their tongues, it says, through that fight. Anyway, the point is no one got hurt. The Israelites didn't get hurt. So, in Joshua, they are conquering all of these people groups who are occupying the land that God is giving them. And it says here, let me read you these two verses. This is back again in Jericho, okay? I just wanted to mention Gibeon. This is back in Jericho. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass and the edge of the sword, with the edge of the sword. Verse 24. And they burnt the city with fire and all that was therein. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of brass and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. So, what do you think of this? They, by the Lord's command, no one is to be kept alive. Not men, not women, not children, not the animals, nothing. Not even the buildings themselves. They're to put fire to it. They're to destroy everything. What do you think about that?
I think they were doing what God told them to do.
Yeah, but what do you think about that?
Kind of extreme.
I mean, you think young and old, you think of the little ones.
You think of the children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the elderly.
So, this is where I think teaching this book gets a little crazy. This in Joshua is about holy war. And we hear the term holy war today and we cringe because we are at a time where our enemies are waging holy war in the name of their God and killing in the name of their God. So to us, the idea of holy war is abhorrent and awful. But this is what Joshua is about. Holy war is about the total annihilation of a people group. And I want you to learn this term. It's called herem, H-E-R-E-M. This term is all of the persons and the objects of value that are associated with the enemy. So if I'm going into, like for example, Jericho, the harem is all of the people, all that they own, everything of value. That's the harem. They are to destroy everything, the harem, okay? My next little statement here says, for Israel, there is no division between secular and spiritual. No separation of church and state here, okay? It's all connected. All of life was holy, and this included the soldiers. There's even in chapter 5 of Joshua, there's a special religious ceremony that prepared the men for battle. It was religious. It was commanded by God. Not only that, remember the covenant. Remember the covenant? Remember last time we had to find it because we all forgot where it was? The fate of Israel and the covenant are one and the same. Israel will succeed as long as they are keeping the covenant. If they do not keep the covenant, then they will not succeed. That's why it's holy war. It's religion and war intertwined. Okay? And then the last point is that Yahweh received credit for every victory, and all of the booty, if it was collected, was his. None was to be taken for personal use. Here's another slide about Haran. And this is how it was explained to me in seminary. Okay, so this may be a little technical. But this idea of holy war and the idea of harem, of the total destruction of the harem, is not unique to the Bible, and it is not unique to the people of Israel. Okay? At this time, this was done by everyone. So in Egypt, I want to show you, there's the Merneptah stele, and in Moab, there's the Mesha stele, and they all claim complete annihilation. So what is a stele? Here's a picture. It's a monument that is found, and it's called a stele because it looks like this. It's often round, like a tombstone almost, okay? But see, this isn't just squiggles, this is writing, like a language, okay? So this is a picture of the Merneptah stele. The Merneptah stele it's also known as the Israel stele, if you're looking, or the victory stele of Merneptah. The inscription is by the ancient Egyptian king Merneptah. That's why it's called the Merneptah stele. The king's name was Merneptah from Egypt. It's around, his reign was around 1200 before Christ. This stele was discovered in 1896 in Egypt, and it's now in the Egyptian Museum of Cairo if you're interested in looking at more pictures. But this is what the Egyptian king wrote on something that was going to be preserved forever. He wrote, "The rulers of my enemies now lie prostrate before me and beg for peace. Not one of my enemies raises his head in revolt. I have devastated," look at the bolded part I have. "I have decimated the people of Israel and put their children to death. All Canaan has been pacified." This is a piece of writing that the king is writing to not only record his history, but to record his victory. He knows that his people are going to read this, and surrounding nations are going to read this, and he wants it to look like he not only won, but he won. It says, "All of Canaan has been pacified. I have decimated the people of Israel." Here's the next stele, is the Mesha stele. The Mesha stele is from around 840 before Christ. It is by the king of Moab, okay? And it says, "I am Mesha, king of Moab." If you look at the bottom, where it's bolded. "But I look down on him and on his house, and Israel has been defeated. It has been defeated forever." Has Israel been defeated?
No.
No. We know that because, here we are today and they're still Israelites. They're called Jews today. Has all of Israel been pacified like the Renepta stele said?
No.
No. So what does this mean?
Exaggerated a little.
It maybe it's exaggerated.
A little bit ahead of
Uh-huh.
You know,
The- I want you to remember that. Remember the first day when we talked about how the Bible came to be. The book of Joshua and the book of Judges were not written for you and me today. They weren't. We have a gracious God that, thank God, it has survived and we can learn so much. But this was written for the Israelites of the day to record their history, not only the military history, but the religious history. And it was written for any surrounding nation that might pick it up to know what? God won. And he didn't just win. He won. He decimated his enemies. God is warrior. You better not mess with us, because if you do, we will kill all of your people. Did women and children survive? I think so. But the way it was written and the way it had to be written for this time and place, it had to be written this way. This is how it was taught to me. Do you understand what my point is? Do you have questions about that? Remember, when we began to ask the question, when you're reading these things that say that, God told them to kill women and children and everybody and not leave anything alive, why is it there and what is it for? What is this? What is the point of this story? The point is to show you that God was keeping with his promise to the Israelites. He was going to deliver them into a land. That God was committed to his covenant. If they were obeying him, he was going to give them victory from their enemies on every side. What is the point for us today? Why is it there and what is it for? You have to ask yourself those questions. But God, if the Israelites are being faithful to him, he will deliver. He will conquer their enemies. He will do anything that is necessary for them to have their land. Hard chapters to teach on. I don't know how else to teach it. This is what I think. Questions? Okay, going back a little bit. Have you ever heard of Achan? This name, Achan? This is in the book of Joshua, and I think it's a very, very important story. So, at this point, God had said, we're still in the story of Joshua, Jericho, the Battle of Jericho. God had said, destroy all the harem. You are not to take anything. Okay? Achan, what does he do? He goes to the city and he takes some stuff, okay? He sees some things that are of value, and he takes them. And because of this sin, he takes them and hides them in his tent under the ground, okay? Well, the Lord can see, and so at the next little battle, the Israelites don't win. And they're like, what's going on? I mean, we've been faithful to the covenant. We should be winning. And God's like, oh, are you being faithful? One sin, one man will make them not win. Every victory depends on the covenant keeping. So that's Achan's sin. So in chapter 7, verse 11, the Lord said to Joshua, Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. So what had happened after Achan stole the things, that some of the Israelites are attacked by the Amorites, and they die. Like I think 30 or 36 of them die. Okay, so that's what Joshua says. Hey, Lord, why are we dying here? And then the Lord says, you have not keeping my covenant. There it says, it continues to say in verse 11, they have taken some of the devoted things, the harem, they have stolen, they have lied, they have put them with their own possessions. This is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run. What happens to Achan at the end in chapter 7, verse 26? Then all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since, which means the Valley of Trouble. You get it? You disobey, you're not going to be victorious. It's all about the covenant. Everything from this point forward is about that covenant. You keep it, we're good. You don't keep it, you forget about your victory. This is holy war. Got it? I want to make a comparison that I think is very important. Going back to Rahab. Rahab is the ultimate outsider. She is from Jericho. She's not an Israelite. She's an outsider. Not only that, what we know her is a prostitute. The lowest of lowest of lowest society. She is trash. She believes in the Lord, right? She has faith in God. She hides the two spies. And because of Rahab, the spies gather enough intel and they are victorious. She is saved because of her faith. Achan, the guy who just stole the harem and then got burned, is the ultimate insider. He is from the tribe of Judah. He is Tamar's descendant. Perfect pedigree. He is the ultimate insider. He does not have faith in Yahweh. He breaks covenant and steals. And he also hides something, just like Rahab hid the two spies. He hides the harem he stole in the ground. And he, one of the points of comparison is that Rahab is taken out of camp to be saved. Achan is taken out of camp to be killed. and he's the insider. So here, the point of all this is to say that the outsiders, although they are not who God has chosen to be his holy people, if they believe in the Lord, they are accepted. And a lot of times, they are the ones that are going to start believing the Lord. The insiders are going to continue to be a problem. The actual Israelites, the actual people of God, are going to be the ones that continue to lose faith. Questions? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. The middle of Joshua, after Canaan is conquered, it is divided up among the tribes. At the very beginning, I also gave you a pretty good map, like a whole page-long map with the division, and it's a colored map. It's the division, and so this will give you a little bit of a picture of, like, here's the tribe of Judah, tribe of Benjamin, the tribe of Dan. That's the land that they were given. So chapters 13 through 22 of Joshua is dividing up the land. Which tribe did not receive land? The Levites. Why?
Because they were the priests and they were with everybody else.
The Lord himself was their inheritance. They were to serve. So they were not awarded land.
Were the cities of refuge later kind of like their land? Or
I'm sorry?
the cities of refuge, is that what it's called? The cities of refuge?
Cities of refuge?
Is that kind of like theirs?
I don't know.
You know, the cities of, what's it called? Maybe I'm calling them the wrong thing. Yeah, the cities of refuge. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
I don't know. I can research that.
No, you're fine.
I probably called it something else. Cities of refuge.
That's what my Bible calls it.
Oh, okay. I've not heard of
What
that.
chapter, Laura?
Tell me one of the cities. There will be worship centers. They will make two cities that are going to be worship centers. One is Jerusalem.
Oh, it's
And what
in
is Dan?
Chapter 20 of Joshua, the cities of refuge.
Of Joshua?
Yeah.
Cities of refuge.
Cities.
Verse 2.
So that anyone who kills a person accidentally, how do you do that? And unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. So, what was your question about the?
Well, I just didn't know if the Levites kind of
If they took
ran
care of
those,
this?
run those cities.
I don't know. I would have to read that. The next chapter says the town for the Levites. I know that they were given some land for their cattle.
So maybe that's what I was just getting.
and
I didn't know
obviously-
if they were together.
Their
Yeah.
families had to live somewhere, so. You can always ask me a question. I won't pretend to know the answer, but. Keep going. So at this point, they all have land. They all are divided. There is no governor. There's no king. Joshua is kind of the military leader, spiritual leader, but they're considered a loose tribal confederation. They still are tribes, and each little tribe is organized on their own way, and that's how they're getting by. Okay, this is what's happening in Joshua. At this point, Shechem becomes the place of worship. At the end of Joshua, chapters 23 and 24, the covenant is renewed at Shechem. Joshua is still the head. When he dies, there will be a shift in the organization of everything. And we'll see that. But I want to read to you a couple of verses out of chapter 24, if you'll go there. I guess I'm not going to read that. It just, basically, he's restating everything that we have already heard. So, like in chapter 14, verse 14. Now fear the Lord and serve him with all faithfulness. Throw away the gods of your forefathers' worship before the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. Verse 15. But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, Then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your forefathers served, But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. This is Joshua speaking. The people answered, verse 16, far be it from us to forsake the Lord and serve other gods. And they continue to say, we will be faithful, far be it from us. They continue to not do that. So here I want to show you again the last little bit of Joshua is, go to chapter 24, verse 29. Remember at the beginning of the book of Joshua, Joshua is son of Nun, Moses' aide. Verse 29, after these things, Joshua, son of Nun, the what?
Servant of the Lord.
Oh, he got promoted. After the whole book, the beginning, he is Moses' aide. At the end, he is the servant of the Lord. So he's 110 years old, and he dies, and he gets buried. And that is the end of the book of Judges. Pretty much, they have the promised land at this point. Questions about the book of Joshua? It's a lot to read in detail, and it's, it's what it is, holy work. As bad as the book of Joshua is, there is no comparing to the book of Judges, which is next. Here's a little outline of the book of Judges for you. It took place between the conquest of Canaan and the destruction of Shiloh. So the dates are about 1400 BC before Christ to 1050 before Christ. A long, long time ago. The judges, they were, so remember Moses and Joshua, they were very spiritual leaders. The judges, they will be more military leaders, okay? Not so much spiritual. Some will be spiritual, but mostly military type leaders. Think of that. Think of a commander. The whole period of Judges, all of the book, all of the judges together, probably did not exceed 120 years. So all of the book of Judges probably took 120 years to complete. Judges. Chapter 2, if you'll go to chapter 2. Verse 10 says, chapter 2, verse 10 of Judges. After that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Wow, right?
Oops.
Did not know the Lord and what he had done for Israel. Do you remember the Shema? Teach it to your children like it was... what has happened?
Kind of sounds like today, doesn't it?
But, what has happened
What span of time is that?
between Joshua and
I guess
Judges?
between the time that Joshua passed away. and
It says a generation.
A generation.
After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, which isn't much, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Verse 11, then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the what? Do you remember what I just read you from Joshua? We will not worship the gods of the Canaanites. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. That's in verse 12. They provoked the Lord to anger. Verse 13, because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Remember the covenant? They're not keeping them, so the Lord is handing them over to their enemies. Verse 15, whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them. just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Do you see where the judges, why do we have judges? Because the Lord raised them up because they kept breaking the covenant and breaking the covenant. They needed some help here. So why did we go from having Moses and Joshua, and why don't we have one anymore? They weren't doing so good without a religious figure. And they kept breaking the covenant. The Lord raised up judges. The Lord did it. That's why we have judges. And this is what is very important in the book of Judges. You have this in a very big colored sheet. Yes? This little circle. And then at the bottom of this page is really cool. You'll have all the judges, and then a description of them, and then how many years they judged. So from these years is how people can estimate about 120 years for all of the book of Judges. Okay? Some of these judges also were concurrent. Because remember, Israel, if you look in the map, it's big. So there could have been a judge in the north at the same time that there was a judge at the south. Okay? So the cycle of pattern of judges is what I just read from the Lord. It begins at the top. Israel disobeys. They worship the Baals, the Ashtaroths. They fall away from the faith. What happens? Israel is oppressed. God hands them over to the raiders, to the people next door who are trying to conquer them. God pretty much says, have at them. They're not faithful to me. Israel is in distress because they're being defeated. What does Israel do? It cries out, Lord, help us. Lord, save us. God raises up a deliverer, a judge. God listens to them. He's still their people. He raises up a judge. Israel is delivered by the judge. The judge helps. Israel is at peace for X number of years. Until what? Do you see why it's a circle? And I would suggest to you that it's not actually a circle. I would suggest to you that it is a downward moral spiral because it gets worse and worse and worse with each time that they sin. It is a downward moral spiral. They are going completely out of control in the book of Judges. Here is a little, these are all the judges, and they're divided into major judges and minor judges. Why would that be?
Because some of them only have like one sentence about them.
Okay, very good. The major judges are not more important than the minor judges. That's this is a literary, really, division. The major judges have more verses to them, so they're major. The minor ones only have like a verse or a mention of them, so they're minor judges. That's why. But those are it, and those are the verses where it talks about them. If later you want to go back and specifically read, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the major judges, but I'm not even going to mention the minor judges. So Othniel is the first judge that we're going to talk about. And I am actually going to read the verses of Othniel as judge. And I want you to follow along with your circle pattern and see where you see this happening in his story. So it's in chapter 3, verse 7. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherahs. You following in your circle? The anger of the Lord burned against Israel so that he sold them into the hands of Cushan Rishtahim, king of Aram. Anytime you can't say it, just say it. To whom the Israelites were subject for 8 years. 8 years, my goodness. Verse 9. But they cried out to the Lord. He raised up a deliverer, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, who saved them. the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, so that he became Israel's judge and went to war. The Lord gave Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Aram, into the hands of Othniel, who overpowered him. So the land had peace for 40 years, until Othniel, son of Kenaz, died. Did you follow it on your thing? This is in every judge story, you can follow it. It's the same story. They sin, the Lord hands them over, they cry out, the Lord raises a judge, the judge saves them. X number of years they're at peace until they disobey again. It gets worse and worse and worse. The next judge we have is Ehud. You've heard this story probably because it's very humorous, so Christians tend to read about it. So it's also in chapter 3, and in verse 12 it says, "Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel." So when the Israelites continue to worship the Canaanite gods, this leads to an invasion by the nation of Moab. God sends Israel, a left-handed, it says he's left-handed man named Ehud, to be its deliverer, to be its judge. So Ehud visits the Moabite king and offers to give him a secret message. So he goes into the throne room and he says, "King, I have a secret message from God. But no, I have to whisper it in your ear." So the king of Moab is fat. It's described as big. So he's just sitting in his throne and he says, "Oh, servants, go out. I have to hear this secret message from God." And so Ehud has remember he's left-handed. He has a dagger strapped to his right thigh so he can reach for it. And he goes and I have a message for you, and he grabs and he kills the king of Moab. That's what it says. I'm not making any of this up. That's how he delivers, because he kills the king, the obese king. Ehud escapes and leads the Israelites in regaining control of the Jordan River Valley. Doesn't that give you all the warm and fuzzies? The next judge is Deborah. We've heard of Deborah, right? She is a prophet named Deborah. She emerges. I have a summary written down that I wrote, so I might be reading these because there's so many, okay? She emerges as Israel's new judge after Israel returns to evil and is invaded by a mighty army from the north, it says. So she counsels Israel's tribe under a great tree. That's why this picture is famous of Deborah. The scene in Scripture describes her counseling the Israelites under a great tree. So people have many paintings of that. Together with, so she, at the great tree, calls for an insurrection, and together with God's help, the Israelites defeat the king's 900 chariots, and the Canaanite general from the enemy, his name was Sisera. Have you heard the story of Sisera in jail? So Sisera is the commanding officer of the enemy, and he has 900 chariots. So he retreats, or goes to hide, and he seeks refuge in a local woman's tent. The woman's name is Jael. And Jael says, "Oh, come take a nap in my tent, I'll hide you."
What's Jael?
And so Jael, well, not Jael. And he goes into her tent, and she gives him some food and some drink, and he falls asleep. And Jael takes a tent peg. Have you seen a tent peg?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a nail. It's a tent peg, and she hammers it into his head and kills him. It's great. So she lulls him to sleep and kills him with a tent peg into his skull. And it's in chapter 5. There's a long, chapter 5 is the Song of Deborah. She recounts her victory in this song. And she is known as not only a warrior and a prophetess, but as the mother of Israel. It's a great story.
And her son's name was
Deborah's son's name? I don't know.
Barak.
Barak? There you go.
Well, I mean, I live there.
I did not remember that. The next is Gideon. You've heard of Gideon, yes? God commissions a very humble man, it says, Gideon, to save Israel from its next invaders, who are the what? Do you remember? The Midianites are the ones that we're defeating this time. The Midianites pretty much have impoverished the Israelites at this point and scattered them. And Gideon tears down his father's altar to the god Baal. His father had been worshiping Baal. Gideon tears it down. And the Israelites respond in droves to his call to fight. He says, let's fight the Midianites. But God demands fewer men for battle. And this is the scene. To test the men, Gideon leads the men to this river to drink. The men who cup their hands to drink, like this, are sent home. And the ones who go like a dog to lap the water, those are the ones selected to fight. Isn't that weird? That's scripture. I'm not making any of this up. So those are the men, the ones who lap the water with their tongues, are chosen for God's army. Spying on the enemy troops at night, Gideon overhears a Midianite soldier tell his friend about a dream in which a small loaf of bread was able to knock down a large Midianite tent. The friend interprets the dream as a sign that Midian will be defeated by Israel. So Gideon is overhearing this conversation between two Midianites about their dream. Gideon and his few men surround the camp of the Midianites, and with sounds of trumpets and broken jars, the Israelites emit such a clamorous war cry that the Midianites turn and slay each other. I'm not making this up. They kill each other, all because of a rumor. And so Gideon is empowered by this rumor, and he goes at night into the camp, and they just make noise. The Midianites are so afraid that they turn and kill each other. Israel, at that point, tries to make Gideon their king. But Gideon refuses, and he says why? Because God alone is the ruler in Israel. That's the story of Gideon. Gideon is the judge with the most words, the most verses. His story is fascinating. Jephthah. So who we're fighting here is the Philistines. And the Ammonites. Well, the Philistines from the east and the Ammonites from the west. Oh, two sides. So Israel turns from its idol worship, and God selects Jephthah, the son of a prostitute, to challenge the Ammonites. Jephthah promises God, listen, he promises God that if he is victorious, he will sacrifice to God what? Do you remember the story? He promises to God that if he's victorious, he will sacrifice to God the first thing that comes out of his house the day he returns from battle. He devastates the Ammonites, and he returns home to see who emerge from his house? His daughter. She is dancing and happy to greet him because she has heard that he was victorious. Jephthah laments his promise. Obviously, he regrets it. But his own daughter encourages him to remain faithful to God with keeping his promises. And Jephthah kills his daughter. Remember the downward moral spiral? It's getting worse and worse and worse. It's really getting bad. My favorite is Samson. Do you remember when we talked about a Nazarite? What was a Nazarite? It was just not someone from Nazareth. No, that's a Nazarene.
It was like a sect. They didn't cut their hair.
Right.
They didn't drink from any wine.
Right. A Nazarite was supposed to be someone devoted to the Lord. So they, from a very young age, they were taken and they were raised by the priests, basically. And they couldn't drink wine, anything fermented from grapes, and they couldn't cut their hair, and there were rules.
But it's a person basically symbolizes his devotion to God by never doing these things. So God blesses Samson, who is a Nazarite, with exceptional abilities. What was his ability? He was strong. And how, his secret strength came from his hair that was never cut. So, it says that one day Samson kills a lion with his bare hands. It says that in Scripture to tell you of his strength. So contrary to his parents' urging, Samson chooses a Philistine woman to be his wife. His parents didn't want that. He wanted to marry a good little Israelite girl. And he chose a Philistine woman to be his wife. During the wedding ceremony, he baffles the Philistines with a riddle, the answer to which they discover only when Samson's wife reveals the answer to them. So she tells on him, she tells the answer. Samson burns with anger and goes home without his wife. But when he returns to get her, the Philistines have given her to another man. I'm not making this up. Samson captures 300 foxes and ties torches to each of their tails, setting the Philistine crops on fire. 300 foxes. That's incredible. When the Philistines go after Samson, the Israelites pretty much, all these Philistines come into the Israelite towns to get Samson. The Israelites are like, here, have him. So they pretty much give him up. And they give him up, bound at the wrist. With God's power, Samson breaks the bindings and uses the jawbone of a donkey to kill 1,000 Philistine men. That's why in this little cartoon he's holding a jawbone of a donkey. That's what he used to kill 1,000 Philistine men. Again, Samson falls in love with another Philistine woman whose name was Delilah. You've heard that story. The Philistine officials urged Delilah to discover the secret of Samson's strength. 3 times Delilah asked Samson the source of his power, and Samson doesn't, kind of lies. After a while, he tells her, right, the source of his strength. And while Samson is asleep, Delilah has his hair cut. She tells the officials. They capture him and they gouge out his eyes. In prison, Samson's hair begins to grow again. And during a Philistine religious festival, the now blind Samson, because remember they took his eyes out, he is brought out to entertain the crowds during this festival. Samson asks his servants to guide him to the pillars of the arena, and crying out to God, Samson knocks down pillars of the temple, killing the Philistine rulers. Do you get how bad the situation is getting? And Samson is actually the only judge that never delivers Israel. It's an entertaining story, but there's nothing there. Questions about the judges, their purpose, anything? I know that was quick. But it is a very, as Joshua was violent, the book of Judges is violent in a different way. It's still pretty violent, pretty gory, pretty mature content. The rest of the book of Judges ends in chapter 21. So 17 through 21, the downward moral spiral just cannot get any worse. These chapters are actually what is known as the text of terror. They are violent in a way that you cannot imagine. And it is very, I don't like to read them. They're just so sordid. They record the most sordid events found anywhere in the Bible, these chapters. If the book ended in chapter 16, ultimately the real problem for the Israelites are these outsiders who are living next to them and encouraging them to worship other gods and Sure, the Israelites were worshiping the other gods, but man, if the outsiders weren't there to marry with them and do all this, maybe they'd be okay. The last few chapters, the text of terror, prove that the real problem for the Israelites is not the outsiders, but themselves. Without a judge, Samson was the last judge. Without a judge, Israel becomes even more corrupt. Chapter 19, I'm going to storytell to you. Have any of you read chapter 19? It was awful, says Laura.
It was bad.
It was bad. So I'm going to storytell it to you. So in chapter 19, there is a Levite. He is living in Ephraim. He takes a concubine. The concubine is unfaithful to him. She leaves, goes back to her father's house. She's from Bethlehem, so she goes back to her father's house in Bethlehem. He doesn't seem, the husband, the Levite, doesn't seem to care for 4 months until all of a sudden he cares again and he goes back to get her. Her father receives him, tries to accommodate the Levite, but he keeps trying to leave, and the father keeps trying to delay his return. So all of a sudden he takes the concubine and leaves. And it's getting dark, and they're near the city of Jebus, but he goes on to the city of Gibeah, which is a Benjamite city, the tribe of Benjamin, an Israelite city. They're Israelites. So he goes looking for hospitality in the city square. Finally, someone invites him to go to his house to spend the night in the Israelite tribe of Benjamin, so he gets invited to spend the night. A gang of Benjamite men knock at the house and demand that the visitors be brought out. So the Benjamite men demand to have sex with the man, with the Levite. The Levite offers them his concubine instead. The men rape her repeatedly throughout the night until she dies. The text of terror. Enraged, the Levite brings his concubine home and cuts her into 12 pieces, sending a piece to each of the 12 tribes of Israel as a symbol of Israel's corruption. How bad can it get? The rest of Israel rallies together in opposition to the tribe of Benjamin, and with God's help, the united tribes kill more than 25,000 Benjamites. And at the very end, Israel grieves for its lost tribe and tries to help the remaining Benjamites to I think, if I remember my professor in seminary, she said she tried to calculate, and she said that probably there were less than 10 Benjamites remaining. So the other tribes tried to find wives for the men remaining so that the tribe would not completely disappear from history. And later on we know that the tribe of Benjamin was brought up numbers again. This proves that the insiders are the problem. These were Benjamite. The man was a Levite. A Levite, supposed to be the religious leaders. In those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. That is repeated, there was no king, that's repeated 3 times. They did what was right in their own eyes is repeated over and over again in the book of Judges. I want you to go to the very end of the book of Judges, chapter 21, verse 25. It is the last verse. Judges 21, verse 25, it says, "In those days Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit." It cannot get any worse than this. Do you see why it's a downward moral spiral? They don't probably even remember that there ever was a covenant at this point. They did what was right in their own eyes. What do you think? I know this is a horrible lesson.
I think how patient God is. That's what I think. How patient, how loving He is. And instead of just saying, you know what, I'm just going to find a new group. He didn't. He loved them, just like a child, like I love my children, and I can't think of anything that they would do that would make me stop loving them.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's nothing.
God, although they are remaining faithless, He is faithful to them. He does not forsake them. Although He's not giving them military victory, He has not left them. And I know that this is a lot of strong material. I don't know of another way to teach Joshua and Judges. You know, we teach our kids the fun stories about the judges, but this is the reality of what these stories tell. And the reason they are told this way is because of Israel's disobedience. And this is really what I want you to take away, is the covenant. God was serious with the covenant. And here at this point, they have completely forsaken Him. And everyone did as he saw fit. From now on, people are going to start calling for a king. We want a king. We want a king. Give us a king. Make somebody a king. 3 times in the book of Judges we saw where in those days there was no king. Why do they want a king? Think about that for next week. Why would Israel want a king? Why would they keep wanting a king? Why did God not give them a king yet? Next week, we're going to do Ruth and 1st and 2nd Samuel. And it will be happier.
Well, it would have to be happy.
It would have to be happier. It won't ever be this violent again. That's why Old Testament is entertaining and